Hello and welcome. Today we'll be having Dr. Emily Heath, who is a teaching fellow, teaching earth sciences in Lancaster Environment Centre. Who's been involved with a lot of green initiatives around the university and around the city. Emily?
Hello, hi. Yeah, I've worked at Lancaster University since about 1999, and I've always worked part-time so that I could spend some of my time being an environmental activist. So I've done all sorts of different things. But in the last couple of years, I've concentrated mostly on doing things at Lancaster University rather than in town. So that's been an interesting journey, really, finding out more about what's going on there and trying to influence the university.
All right, okay. And just a little bit about your background as a scientist. You teach earth sciences. So what exactly sort of got you interested in this degree and in this field?
Well, I did a first degree in geophysics in the early 1990s, and then I did a PhD in volcanology at Lancaster. And while I was a PhD student, I got involved in environmental activism, mainly because I spent part of my PhD in Milton Keynes, working at the Open University in a lab there. And I bought a bicycle for the first time in order to be able to get around Milton Keynes, which has fantastic cycle lanes, much better than at the time than Lancaster's. And getting into cycling kind of opened my eyes into the big picture of green activism and equality and all sorts of things. So I highly recommend cycling as a way of getting into things. And then when I came back to Lancaster, I then carried on, got involved in a student society at the time called Green Action, and I've never looked back, really.
All right. Yeah, it's like cycling is a gateway drug. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
It's good. So just as a follow-up to that, since you've been involved teaching and involved in environmental groups in Lancaster, how do you personally, just sort of quite briefly, how do you see the evolution over time of environmentalism in Lancaster?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting question. It's a little bit hard to judge because I went from being a student activist to then being much more focused on green politics in Lancaster. So I was an elected councillor for 12 years. And so my focus was much more on very, very local stuff, community-based activism. But I think through the whole time I've been involved, there's been some kind of green group, I don't necessarily mean Green Party, but a sort of eco-focused student society or something going on at the university. But it's peaked and troughed. It's come and gone with phases of activism as different people have joined and left. I think all student societies have that problem in a way of continuity.
Yeah, that's one of the big issues, I think.
Yeah,
societies.
Yeah. But it's really nice to see at the moment that there's a lot of activity, both with XR, Green Lancaster, lots of kind of very practical projects. So I think overall, I would say there's been a bit of a shift away from kind of campaigning and a bit more towards doing. But I'm glad to see that there's still some of both going on. If you see what I mean by doing, it's the kind of, the actual kind of, growing food in the eco hub and all of that kind of thing. That's a relatively new thing over the last decade.
So for the benefit of Lancaster University students who might want to get involved in, green activism around campus, the groups that we have, for example, are Lancaster University Extinction Rebellion, which is what myself and Skanda are involved with. Green Lancaster, which has a lot of looser affiliations with it. Edible Campus sort of describes itself. They grow food. The Precious Plastic Society, which, does a lot about plastic waste, reusing plastic waste. And then last on this list, the Lancaster University Climate Emergency Group, which is the one that Emily here is involved with. So, Emily, so why did you initially get involved with the LUCE group?
Yeah, well, I actually set this group up really because I could see that there was a gap. This was before the LUXR group existed last summer in 2019. And I was partly inspired by the school strikes and a lot of young people getting active in calling for urgent change on the climate crisis. and thinking we really need to do this at Lancaster University as well. So I set up the petition that we then gathered about 2,100 signatures on over the subsequent few months, and set up a group to kind of lead that campaign. And this is an informal group, so it's got staff and students on it, and anybody's welcome to get involved. It's not affiliated to any particular part of the university. It's just for whoever wants to get involved and be involved in whatever way you want. So we've had various quite informal meetings just to talk about different ideas of how we would get this campaign, bring it to people's notice, maximise the number of petition signatories, and then maximise the impact that petition had when we finally decided that we had enough signatures. So we met with Simon Guy and the Vice Chancellor.
Simon Guy, who is the person in charge of the University of Sustainability, right?
That's right, yeah. So he's the Pro-Vice Chancellor who has sustainability as part of his remit, although it's a very big remit that includes a lot of other stuff, which is a bit of a problem because we think that this sustainability agenda is big enough for somebody to be leading that, that alone. Mm-hmm. And it kind of conflicts with some of his other portfolio areas as well. So that's going to be a tricky thing. Mm-hmm. But he was very willing to meet with us, and the Vice Chancellor was as well. So a few of us met with them and talked through what we wanted, reiterated the demands of the petition, and they said they needed a bit of time to think about it and to work out what was doable. And we were a bit disappointed, but accepted that that might be a genuine thing. So that was back in December, and then really very little has happened since then. There's been a few events that have been top-down led, with Simon Guy organising a big conversation event for staff and then another one for students. But we were fairly critical of those events in the way that they were organised and the timing of them as well. For example, the staff one being held during the UCU strike, which meant a lot of people who wanted to couldn't take part in it. So there's been a bit of information gathering and a bit of conversation about sustainability, but I don't think we've actually seen anything real happen yet, other than what's been driven by the coronavirus crisis, because that actually is having a really big impact.
Just because you mentioned the big conversation and the actions taken by the Vice Chancellor and Simon Guy, we as part of Extinction Rebellion were really sort of shocked to see that the event was held during a strike week, that wasn't in tune with the bigger fight of fairness throughout this movement. And we did go to protest the fact that students weren't allowed either the big conversation, because it did feel quite sort of
small.
Yeah, small. It was quite small for a big conversation. That's what we were telling them. But even for staff, it was quite small. Like, I spoke to the whole PPR department, the politics, philosophy, and religion, and out of all the people that I spoke to, none of them had heard. I spoke to about 10 lecturers, and none of them had heard about this big conversation.
Mm. Yeah, so it was a start, wasn't it? But it wasn't a very impressive event, I don't think. And we're still waiting to see what comes out of it in terms of real action.
Yeah, from what we got from inside, we spoke to a few people after the event who stopped to speak to us when we were protesting outside, and they did tell us that some interesting things were talked about, and I think we'll hopefully have someone on the show in the next few weeks who was at the event, who will be able to talk to us about it. But from what we've heard, it seems like it was a lot of talk and not a lot of specifics. Like, for example, there was talk apparently of a carbon budget, but no real action was taken towards that.
Yeah, a lot of sort of ideas thrown around, but no actual commitment to carrying out these ideas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, contrast this with other universities that have set up their own versions of citizens' assemblies, or, had really big inclusive debates, coming up with ideas and thinking through the ramifications of all the things that need to change. Mm-hmm. So I feel like Lancaster's off to a slow start, really.
Yeah, what I think. That's what this is all about. I think we can all say that we're grateful that these conversations are happening. I think the problem, at least for us, I think for Ellie and I and for LUXR, it's that these conversations are too little too late.
Yeah.
And especially with the fact that no real action has come about, when, you know, to take it sort of a very recent happenings, with the COVID-19 outbreak, we've seen the power of emergencies, like how quickly the university can mobilize to do things like cancel teachings, move everything online. These things can happen, and they can happen fast, but there needs to be a sense of urgency. And I think the COVID-19 outbreak has shown us that it's not a lack of power or lack of resources. It's really just lack of sense of urgency.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. A lack of drive, a lack of push, I think, from, you know, the general sort of population of, I suppose, students and teaching staff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we saw in some of the communications from senior managers at the start of this crisis, language like when we go back to business as usual. And we need to challenge that and make sure that they realise that business as usual can never be university business again. We have to change the whole structure and the way we work. And maybe this crisis will give people, I mean, for example, the fact that we're having this video conference instead of sitting together in a room somewhere means that us and everybody else has had to rapidly get used to new technologies, and those could be ways of avoiding flying in future. So we need to make sure people don't just slip into daily habits.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to speak very quickly about the university management, the actual management of the environment at Lancaster University. You said Simon Guy has a portfolio. So the person, we're going to kind of single him out, I guess, because he is the person in charge of environment and sustainability at Lancaster. His portfolio includes a lot of different titles, including, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, international expansion.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. I was going to say one of his remits is to oversee the development of international campuses, of which Lancaster has several in different countries, and is still planning to expand with a new one in Leipzig being set up at the moment. Yeah, so some of the ways in which they work are deeply unsustainable, I think, and but it's quite difficult to challenge.
From the big question, the university's follow-up to the big conversation that was aimed at students, they discussed the three key areas of Lancaster's emissions and, you know, environmental problems, and the biggest one was you know, the international travel between, you know, all the many campuses that the university has, and just international issues in general. So yeah, it really does make sense to me how the guy in charge of sustainability is also the guy in charge of you know, all of this international stuff, when really the two don't go hand in hand at all.
Yeah, but he is also in charge of digital, which could be part of the solution, although it has its own environmental impacts. Of course, it's not carbon neutral, all this video conferencing and online teaching and so on. But yes, I totally agree. There are some real tensions there, and I'm not sure whether he has really acknowledged that yet.
Yeah. Would you like to quickly talk to us about what LUC is currently sort of doing, or maybe, I don't know if you're still as active during the crisis as you were before, but what you guys are doing and sort of what your future plans are?
In a way, things have been on hold a little bit over the last few weeks, partly because of the strike, which I was heavily involved in, being the branch secretary of the trade union that was leading that strike.
Yeah.
But also because now everybody's dispersed all over the place, and we realise that the university really has to focus in the short term on dealing with this crisis. So things are slightly on hold, but we're not going to let it be forgotten. I think as soon as the time is right for refocusing back on sustainability, we will ramp up the campaign, focusing still on those 6 demands that we had in that original petition. We want a target of net carbon emissions by the university by 2030. So that only gives us 10 years really, which means we have to start right now this year, and phase out all the bad things and phase in the good stuff as soon as we possibly can. and do it in a really democratic and transparent way as well, because I think the university has become a very hierarchical and top-down organisation, and we need to challenge that and bring back structures and processes that would enable people like us to have more say in what happens and feeding ideas in and try to influence wider community change.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's something that struck me when I went and visited the university court a few weeks ago, or what must be, feels like months ago now. But yeah, it really struck me how far the university have gone to deconstruct, to just destroy any ounce of democratic process within university structures. Like I really wasn't aware of these sort of self-affirming elections and appointments and things like that. It's quite scary when you really look into it.
It is, yeah.
And I think, we all agree, I think the environmental crisis has to be dealt with in a very democratic manner. It can't be sort of, it can't be fixed from the top up, from top down, I mean. And very quickly as well, were you at the student and LUSU conversation for environment? So the sort of second instance of the big conversation. I don't know if you went to that. No. So there. So that was. Yeah, I think it was a strike week as well. So this was an event that was hosted by LUSU, by the Student Union of Lancaster University, and it was advertised as a 1-hour Q&A with the management of Lancaster, with the VC, and with Simon Guy, as well as a few other people. Like I think Derek, is that his name? Darren, my bad. Darren, who's in charge of Green Lancaster. Yeah. And unfortunately, their presentations took about 40 minutes, which meant that we didn't get an hour to ask questions and answer. Again, once again, a problem of democratization, I think, there. But something that really struck me during that presentation was the data that we were shown. I think the university, like every other institution, is a little bit confused as to how to calculate emissions. I think that's a big problem for institutions all around the world, is what counts as our own carbon emissions and what counts as someone else's, right? And it seems like the university still hasn't figured out yet how to properly do this.
Yeah, I agree. And also how to allocate it to different parts of the university as well, so that we can all understand what our own contribution to that is. So, for example, I'd love to see the data broken down by department in terms of travel, that kind of thing, so that we could start to figure out why perhaps some departments have a much higher carbon footprint than others. I'm sure that will be the case, and I could guess which ones they would be, but I haven't actually seen any real data to back that up.
Yeah, and the amount of urgency, I think, like we were saying, is quite scary, because we had 2 conversations, one for staff, one for students, over what, I think a year, because they took about since September to organize. So in one academic year, we've had 2 conversations of a total of 2 hours, which, for something that we personally at least see as an emergency, it doesn't seem very urgent. There's no sense of urgency.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as soon as we're able to, we need to mobilize people to physically come together in a space and demand more action and faster action. So the climate strike event that we did on the 20th of September, just before the start of term, so this was mostly a staff-led thing, was a really nice event for bringing hundreds of people together in Alexandra Square, all to say we want climate action now. We had some speeches, we had some music, we had a kind of physical demo where we gathered into the shape of a human globe, which sort of worked. Perhaps not as well as we hoped it would, but at least it was a nice sort of thing to bring people together. And I would love to do some more of that, but obviously it looks at the moment like that kind of thing isn't going to be possible again until maybe October, November, if even Michaelmas term goes ahead as planned. So perhaps we need to be thinking about other ways. How can we, if we can't physically get together and do this, how can we exert pressure from all the different places where we're dispersed all over?
Yeah, I know Ellie and I had a lot of plans for
Yeah.
not just for our final year, because we're both graduating this year, but also for LUXR. We had a lot of plans to sort of push for our eco agendas, including, for example, I think we were planning to try and get a single-use plastic ban on campus.
Oh, great! Yeah.
Because for us, it made no sense that, for example, the undergraduate conference that the university was hosting, which I was a part of, we were given 2 plastic water bottles each, about 250 milliliters, that everyone just threw away into a random bin. And of course, this is a very small item, and it doesn't contribute a lot in the grand scheme, but it is part of the problem. And I think it doesn't make sense. There is no reason except laziness, in my opinion, for the university to not install a single-use plastic ban. But unfortunately, how do we, in this situation under COVID-19 rules, how do we push for that? Because our plan was to, do some sort of occupying and things like flyers and things like that. But it's really difficult now with these with this lockdown.
Yeah, I'm not sure how this could work from a student point of view, but I think one glimmer of hope is that within staff teams, there's actually been quite a bringing together of people digitally over the last few weeks. For example, in my department, the Lancaster Environment Centre, we're meeting as a department 3 times a week online, which, we actually used to physically meet about once a term. It wasn't very often, and then it was a very sort of like just getting the management picture of how the budget's doing and all of that kind of thing. It's actually feeling much more democratic now. There's a lot more discussion and questions and ideas and sharing of things. And so perhaps one way forward is to bring the sustainability side of things into those agendas. As soon as we've kind of settled down into new ways of working and we've got over the immediate kind of crisis discussions, we can bring sustainability into those forums in a much more active way.
Yeah, I think talking and discussions are definitely part of solving. I mean, it reminds me of who was it? H.G. Wells, I think, said that socialism takes too many evenings because it takes too many discussions, too many get-arounds,
I so relate to that.
Yeah. The point that you made earlier about how difficult it is to keep a consistent movement in a university because students are flowing in and out of the university. I've seen that with my own sort of societies I've been involved in. It's really difficult. Societies that aren't established and aren't strong really in the university tend to just die off every few years and be brought back to life magically when some students feel like they desperately want that society. But for an environmental movement, especially with deadlines like we have for runaway climate change, I think it's imperative that this doesn't turn into an individualized issue, and rather the university sort of facilitates the structures to keep that environmental movement going, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the LUXR group could play a role in that because it's both staff and students working together. There will be some continuity that student societies wouldn't necessarily have. I think obviously the danger to that is that staff dominate it and that students don't have a meaningful role to play, and we'll try to avoid that.
Or hey, maybe we could show up in numbers and dominate the
stuff. Yeah. It's also a way to kind of keep the learning that we do from year to year and pass it on, and have repositories of information that we can share, because that's another thing that falls by the wayside. People keep reinventing the wheel because there's no handing over of what's already happened.
If you had to congratulate, say, the university on one or two sort of things that it's really done, like actions that it's taken that have had real impacts, what would those be?
I think Green Lancaster would be the one. I think that's been a real success story. It's involved a lot of people. There's been quite a diversity of projects run through Green Lancaster, and it's it made that interesting kind of crossover between something that's kind of management led or embedded in structures like the Students' Union, and something that's got quite a lot of bottom up influence as well, with students being able to kind of shape it and run it to some extent. So, and that's been going for quite a few years now, and it seems to get better and better every year. So well done, Green Lancaster. I think you're fantastic. We'd like more of that.
Yeah, big up to better. Lancaster.
And I know that Green Lancaster suffers from having quite a small budget and having to compete for money every year, and you know, always having to worry about how they're going to keep their projects going. So I'd love to see it even more embedded in university budgets and strategies, so that they've got that continuity to rely on, and they can just get on with delivery and not having to worry about where the money's coming from.
Yeah, Ellie and I have been working a lot with the budget of investments. So with LUXR, some of you may have seen that we've been analyzing the budget and seeing where our investments are going, because a few years ago, I think, Ellie, when was this? In 2014, I think?
The last time was 2014 that a Freedom of Information request was made for the information about how much money goes into fossil fuels and as well the arms trade. It was 6 years ago now, goodness.
6 years, 2014, long time ago, God. But we made a Freedom of Information request more recently and got data for 2020. And after, what was it again, 70 hours, I think, 70 hours of work, our group found about 10% of, was it about 10%, of investments go to fossil fuel industries or related industries that work directly for the fossil fuel industry. And about 5% went to weapons manufacturer or companies that had a sort of very clear hand in making weapons as well as other products. So I think those are distinctions that we have to make very clear, because to be fair, like some of those companies, for example, in the arms trade, percentages don't necessarily just make weapons, but they do make in part weapons. For example, what was it, Ellie? We'd seen an air ventilator company that we invest in. They also make grenades.
Yeah. This is a good way of influencing. To divest from those industries might put pressure on them to concentrate on the good bits of the business and
carrying on with the work that we're doing with that, we're going to be getting together a report, like a formal report, hopefully for May, which Simon Guy told us was the next time that the investment board is meeting. Given the current situation, I'm not so sure how well, obviously, that's going to go.
Yeah. And also, just to bring it back to sort of how we were supposed to mobilize in these times, we had sort of we had kind of clear plans of what we were going to do to pressure the university if the investment policy that we were proposing wasn't being listened to, right? But if at the investment board meeting they don't really sort of listen to our suggestions, and if they just dismiss us, it's very difficult for us to know what to do then. Do we smear the university online? Do we post flyers up or on the university buildings that no one's going to see? It's really difficult to know how to work in activism right now, I think.
It is, but I mean, I couldn't possibly encourage any particular strategy there, but I would say that the university is very protective of its reputation, and targeting the media, I think, and letting the world know what really goes on is quite a good way forward.
And I remember Simon Guy's response to us when we raised the issue of the investments during the big conversation with students was that he thought we weren't being fair to the university by saying that they had been lazy in their investment policy. But I mean, personally, I don't know how else to qualify how else to describe a university that doesn't care enough to go through its own investments to make sure they're ethical. right?
Yeah.
I told him if a group of students like us are able to find this and we're not even paid to do it, then should why should they not being paid this, you know, six-figure salary that he is?
Yes.
Not to personally attack him, but I think the criticism stands. They should be more careful, and the fact that they gave us a sheet of paper that said that there were no fossil fuels, and that by looking into just one of the companies we found fossil fuel investment, says a lot, I think, about the way the university handles environmental issues, in a sort of like, if I can't see it, it's not happening kind
Yeah.
of way.
Yeah. No, it's really disappointing. I think lazy is the right word, because the response could have been, oh, we had no idea, we didn't realise, you know, we thank you for raising it, we'll sort it out. How hard can that be? And maybe now they will, because there's the added reason of fossil fuels not doing very well in the coronavirus crisis.
Yeah.
I wish they would do it for other moral reasons, but perhaps they've got financial reasons to help now as well.
Yeah. But to be fair, there were some good investments as well. Like we did find some investments in solar energy and wind energy, so renewables. There were some strong investment funds in those, and I think our goal as a group, and I think, you know, other environmental groups around Lancaster will be hopefully helping us in this, is to not only divest from the bad investments, but also to positively influence the renewable energies market and such with our investment. So not just divesting from the bad, but also investing in the good.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and could be an opportunity to invest in local projects as well.
Yeah, and because that's something that was raised by one of my professors who is on the investment board, or who was. He was telling me that for years he had been trying to get that money away from the two investment companies the university invests in, who then invest the university's money into fossil fuels, and kind of move that away from the city, you know, and big financial hubs, and more into local projects. I think the university could be a massive funding agent for small projects around Lancaster City, or even Lancashire in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to quickly ask you about this idea of growth for the sake of growth,
Yeah.
which has been kind of floated around a lot in UCU meetings I've heard, or in student circles. We've seen a rise in numbers of students at Lancaster, without, I think, a subsequent rise in services provided, and in things like accommodation and things like lecture halls, and at the same time an expansion on the international level as well. Could you please maybe tell us a little bit about that, what you know about those?
Yeah, well, there has been a target of growing the student population by about 5% a year in recent years, and
5% a year.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which, when you compound it, you know, I can't remember the exact doubling time, but it doesn't take many years to double. So Lancaster, in the time that I've been here, sort of 25 years or so, has massively expanded. And you're right, I don't think the services, the staffing levels, the counselling service and all sorts of other things have kept pace with that. So we've got all sorts of problems triggered by that rapid rate of growth. And I think what really underlies it is, well, it's partly a financial imperative, because obviously more students brings in more tuition fees, and that means you can spend more on shiny buildings to get even more students. But it's also, and I think this applies not just to universities but to all sorts of other organisations, there's this drive to kind of be important and be a player. And I kind of would like to see Lancaster being a bit more humble and realising that it's a relatively small university in the north of England, and it's good that it's an excellent university, and obviously I'm not knocking that, but it can be an excellent small university. Why does it have to be an excellent big one? I think that given the size of Lancaster itself, the city that we're attached to, which is also quite small, but also has big growth ambitions for really just seems like for the sake of it, so that it can be more important. I think it's really important for the university to kind of not become so big that it really dominates the town in a way that's unhealthy, because there's already tensions, town and gown kind of tensions, and the university is a brilliant positive force in Lancaster. You know, it brings in a lot of income and culture and exciting things, and that's great. But if it gets too big, it will start to feel like Lancaster is a suburb of Lancaster University, and I don't think that will be a healthy thing. So I think we need to have an open conversation, you know, staff and students and managers, about what is a sustainable size for the university to be, and whether it might just stay that size or even contract a little bit, because I think the future is not going to be as globalized as it is now, and perhaps we need to rethink the whole kind of international education system and relocalize it so that each university has a kind of a more of a local catchment area, you know, which could include Northern Europe for Lancaster. It's a train journey away rather than flying halfway around the world. Absolutely. But that means that there is going to be a more limited market, and so we need to think about, you know, how big can UK universities be without putting each other out of business, and without relying on this very unsustainable international travel that we've come to depend on.
Yeah, there's a whole conversation there about can a university be small, like you said, and still be excellent? Yeah. Because in my own opinion, what I see is that the university is very much focused on league tables. You know, we see it everywhere. It's become a bit of a meme around student circles: top 10, top 10, top 10. We're always told that everywhere we go, but sometimes it doesn't feel like that hype measures to the reality we live in. We have, you know, for example, right now, when the whole world is on lockdown, students are forced to go back home to other countries sometimes, and we still are asked to pay rent, whereas in a lot of other universities, rent has been waived for a third term. Because most students actually will not be coming back to Lancaster and have been asked by Lancaster University to not come back to the university, but still to pay rent to the university.
There's no way that students should be funding what will probably be a financial crisis for the university over the coming months. But
and it seems like this isn't really good for their league tables, because league tables, as far as I'm aware, are very heavily influenced by student satisfaction scores. So I don't really understand the drive for them to be a top 10 uni, but still to grow, even at the expense of student satisfaction, which seems to be such a huge factor. So I think it doesn't, for me at least, it doesn't seem like stopping the university's current growth and just focusing on bettering the university. To me, that doesn't seem like it will lower us in any way in the student tables.
No, I agree. And I think actually a probable driver, I don't think it's ever explicitly stated, but probably one of the drivers of the growth of Lancaster University is that we're not in the Russell Group, which is a kind of elite group of quite powerful universities, all of which are bigger than Lancaster. And it's an invitation-only group. So Lancaster has done what it can in terms of getting up the league tables to be a player with those elite universities, but because it's still very small, I think it's unlikely to get invited to join.
Very young as well. Let's not forget how old is Lancaster? 50 years old, something?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Compared to Cambridge, Oxford, and the likes, it's very young.
That should be irrelevant, really, shouldn't it? In terms of, you know, power shouldn't rest with the old institutions, but maybe it shouldn't rest with the big ones either. Maybe there should be, maybe the Russell Group needs to be disbanded and universities all have equality amongst themselves. That would be
just to go back a little bit, maybe with Ali, to the what's happening environmentally speaking around Lancaster Town. Could you maybe talk to us about, have you been involved in projects around Lancaster Town as well?
Yes, I have. I've been involved in projects in town for many years now, mostly through the Green Party, which I'm a member of. But there are also other groups like Extinction Rebellion now is a big player. There was a big transitions city movement, which is still going, but I think has been slightly superseded by XR. And there are all sorts of other groups promoting different agendas. So whether it's kind of bus users or vegans or whatever, there's a lot going on in Lancaster. For the size of city that it is, I think it's a very vibrant green place. And it has become greener over the years because of so many people getting involved in projects, getting stuck in and making things happen and finding the funding to do things. Yeah, so it's a really nice place to live, and you can see why a lot of graduates of Lancaster do stay here, like I did.
Yeah, the pull to stay for a master's is definitely strong.
Ooh, yeah.
Currently, I'm personally thinking, okay, maybe I should just stay one more year.
Becomes 2, becomes 5, becomes 10.
Becomes 25 in my case.
Have you been doing any work personally for climate change subjects, like scientifically speaking?
Teaching wise, I teach a module in natural hazards at first year level, which includes meteorological hazards, which are obviously generally getting worse as climate change bites. But I don't do research. That's part of the deal with me working part-time, is I focus on teaching and student support and not research.
Okay.
Which I have no regrets about. And it's also enabled me to have a life without flying as well, which I think is quite hard as a researcher, but I hope it will get easier over the coming years.
Yeah, that's quite difficult. Yeah, I think we're gonna try and have some people over to talk about very specific issues of climate change. So if you do want to talk about even now or another time about sort of meteorological issues, you're absolutely welcome to, because I think we want this to be something that students can listen to, not just to learn what's happening around Lancaster, but also to learn about specific parts of climate change, right? Because when we do our LUXR sort of weekly like info sesh and stuff, we see that a lot of students know that there's a global warming emergency and there's a crisis, but they don't understand the specifics of it. And fair enough, like it isn't, I think it's not being well taught. I mean, it seems like from what I've listened to, from what I've heard from people, it seems like the school system doesn't really put an emphasis on this. So why would they know about it?
What would be your view on embedding it into the first year curriculum across all the programs at Lancaster, so that everybody gets some training in sustainability and climate and biodiversity crises, no matter what they're studying? Do you think that's a good idea?
Interesting idea, actually. Yeah, I think especially making something compulsory, such that with the end result that everyone kind of knows just how bad things are and what they can do personally, and what they can be pushing, higher up management to be doing. I think that is a very interesting idea, actually.
It could even be tailored to each subject, like economics students could be learning about climate change and economics in a sort of mandatory module.
Yeah, you could tailor it, definitely. I think there's a precedent as well, because I think most students now have some training about careers in most of the years of their degree, which is usually a sort of non-credit bearing thing you have to do. Probably not massively popular, but at least it's a model that could be rolled out to broaden it and teach life skills, not just kind of how to get a graduate job kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it would create more environmentally minded individuals, because something that I've been personally discovering in my own research for things like my dissertation, my graduate dissertation, or in my own sort of personal reading, is that there's such an intersectionality between subjects when it comes to climate change, and the environment impacts literally every topic that I can think of, right? Everything that's taught at Lancaster is in some way impacted by environment. be it psychology, where, you know, for example, eco-anxiety is sort of rising,
Yeah.
and that could impact the psychological fields, be it, you know, geology, obviously,
Yeah.
things like geography, geology, but yeah, it's I think it's
astrophysics. Not so much.
Surely there's something for everyone in environmental
but change in galaxies.
So perhaps we need a campaign that's a bit like the "Why is my curriculum white" campaign. Thing what's missing from everyone's curriculums. I think, as far as I know, green politics isn't taught at Lancaster, is it?
Nope.
And
no.
green economics isn't either. And these are major disciplines, actually. You know, they are, you know,
growing very quickly as well.
Yeah. But they seem to be blind spots here.
Yeah, I think it would be nice to see the university, like that's kind of my personal conclusion, is that it would be nice to see the university change its sort of way of acting around the environment, from an individual minded policy to a more structural policy.
That's right, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because we've had a couple of decades of the individual approach, the kind of here's some nice things to do, here's little ways you can change your lifestyle, here's why, and you know, obviously people that are maybe a bit predisposed to be interested in that anyway have really taken that and run with it, but so many other people have completely ignored it. I think we have to conclude that hasn't really worked in terms of the scale of change that we need. Yeah.
Especially with the deadlines involved, before we hit runaway climate change, so dates that we can't go back on. I'd love to see, for example, the compost system that the Unity has been trying out. What was it again? I think they've completed one compost bin around the eco hub.
A test, like a trial run. They've
do you mean like kitchen food waste?
Yeah,
flats and that kind of thing.
Yeah, compost. Yeah, and I think that I've heard that it was plagued by rats. Apparently, they've had issues with rats. But
so embrace the rats as part of our biodiversity. Wildlife.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, if we love the ducks so much, why don't we love the rats too? But it would be nice to see the compost bins kind of being rolled out across all colleges and not just at the other end of campus and one bin. We've seen also a crisp packet bin at the library. Again, a great idea, but I think it would be nice to see that, you know, pushed and have
wide scale.
Yeah, and things like Tetra Pak bins as well.
Yes, there's one around by the Eco Hub, isn't there? But it's Tetra Pak is such a common thing. You know, your milk, your juice, everything is in Tetra Pak. It'd be very useful to have have more bins of that.
But again, the problem is really that we're pushing I think, in my opinion, we're pushing individuals to take these changes upon themselves, but then the structure isn't there. Like, if I want to compost my food waste, what am I to do if the one bin that we have is full? You know,
and rat infested.
That too, yeah. Have you heard anything about the electricity sort of use of the university? Because I know we have the wind turbine, which is always pointed to by the university when asked about environmental issues. And you know, and fair enough. I think I haven't seen another university that has its own wind turbine. But I don't know if you've heard anything about the numbers, sort of if the university is planning to do anything more.
I think there are some plans at an early stage to build a second wind turbine and a solar farm to generate more electricity. But I don't know what stage they're at or whether funding has been allocated. I suspect not. But I think those are that comes under what's called Scope 1 and 2 emissions, so the university's direct energy consumption for heating and lighting and all the rest of it. So basically gas and electricity use. And I think those could be quite quickly reduced to zero if we did build more capacity for renewables. So I would make that quite a big priority for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think that was something that sort of came out of the big conversation, both the staff and student one, was they said, scope 1 and 2 together were not the largest ones, but they were the easiest ones to do. And it was scope 3, sort of international and transport and stuff like that. That's where they said that they were going to have the biggest problem. So I think
and procurement.
Procurement. So I think, in the coming months and weeks, months and years, I suppose, that's, I guess, where the main, not the main focus, but a lot of the focus should be on in trying to get the university to act on that, because it is the biggest, it was the biggest source of their emissions.
Yeah, it's sort of a quick win, if you like, if there's the will there to do it. One thing that just worries me slightly about that is that it's a very remote thing, so building a big bit of kit somewhere doesn't involve anybody in the university other than the people that are project managing that. And I think that if the university were to prioritise that and not do other things as well, it would just delay the culture change and behaviour change that we need. So I think it needs to happen, but that it needs to be alongside bringing forward the scope 3 carbon reduction plan as well.
Yeah. Do you think there needs to be a culture change at the tops or levels of management?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and at the bottom, it's not everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. I think we'll probably wrap it up around here. But yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Emily Heath, for coming along on our first episode. Woo.
Yeah.
Hopefully we keep it going. Yeah. We just want to maybe end it with the sort of tip of the week. Our tip of the week to stay eco-friendly around Lancaster University or Lancaster Town features the shop called Single Step, which is located in Lancaster Town. Address maybe that might be good.
78 Penny Street. I know.
Oh, there we go. we've got a loyal customer here.
It's right underneath Whaletail.
That's right. Yeah, down a little alley off of the upper bit of Penny Street before you get into the pedestrian precinct.
Yeah, and the Single Step, I think Ellie and I have been customers for a bit now, and they're really fantastic. They sell in normal time, at least, not in COVID time. They sell everything vegetable and fruit wise, so produce. They sell them organic, I think, and non-packaged, so you can go and get loose organic products there. You can get a lot of sort of eco-friendly products from anything from soap to candles to even sort of spices and nuts in your own packaging. Even pasta, you can even go with your own packaging and get yourself a box of pasta. So it's great stuff. And during this COVID-19 outbreak, they are doing deliveries and collection. They have just started a bespoke box system where you can order your own box of food from them, and you pay online, I think, by card.
So yeah, that's been our first episode. Hope everyone's enjoyed it. We hope to bring them out at least, maybe every couple of weeks or so, with different hosts, different guests, covering a wide range of topics, both sort of rather specific and on the wider view of things. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to Dr. Emily Heath as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.